What is the most effective way to paralyze the Russian war machine? Ukraine seems to have found the answer. Strike at the heart of Moscow's military operations: the oil. Using targeted drone strikes, Ukraine systematically attacks Russian oil refineries, hitting Putin where it hurts the most. These attacks not only disrupt the fuel supply for troops on the front lines, but also deal a severe blow to the Russian economy, which is still largely supported by its oil industry despite Western sanctions. The latest of these strikes could very well be the boldest Ukraine has carried out to date. On January 11th, Ukraine conducted a long-range drone attack on the Taneco refinery, one of Russia's largest and most modern facilities. This strike resonated across Russian territory, both physically and symbolically, proving that even Putin's resources located deep within his country are not safe. In this video, we will examine this attack in detail, the broader impact of Ukrainian strikes on Russian refineries, and how this bold strategy is redefining the course of the war. But first, let's look at what happened at Taneco. On January 11th, Ukraine orchestrated a spectacular drone attack on the Taneco refinery, located in the city of Nizhnekamsk. More than 1,300 kilometers inside Russian borders, this strike sends a clear message to Putin. Ukraine is not only undermining Russia's oil production capacity, but also demonstrating increasing audacity and mastery in striking the heart of Russian territory. Taneco is a major strategic target because it is a gigantic and one of the most modern refineries in Russia. When operating at full capacity, it can process up to 16 million tons of crude oil per year. This oil is transformed into various products, mainly petroleum derivatives, that are either sold to other countries or used to fuel tanks and vehicles deployed against Ukraine. Despite Western sanctions, this industry continues to thrive in Russia. In 2022, Russian diesel production increased by 6%, followed by a growth of 3.4% in 2023. A similar pattern is observed for gasoline, with a growth of 4.3% in 2023. 2022 compared to 2.8% the following year. Although the pace of growth is slowing, it is clear that Russia is increasing its sales of refined petroleum products each year. Losing a colossal refinery like Taneco is therefore an inevitable blow. This corresponds to 16 million tons of crude oil that Russia can no longer transform into finished products. It is then forced to either sell this crude as is, with significantly reduced revenues, or store it in its already pressured reserves while waiting to transport it to another refinery. In both cases, the consequences are heavily detrimental to Russia. Images broadcast after the strike on Taneco show the refinery engulfed in flames. However, the Russian propaganda machine was quick to react in the days following the attack. The press service of the Republic of Tatarstan, where the refinery is located in the federal district of the Volga, denied that a fire had occurred on the site, despite visual evidence. According to their statements, the plant administrators had simply conducted a simulated evacuation. As for the intense glows visible in the images, the press office claims it was not a fire. According to the press office, these glows were lit by the employees themselves as part of standard evacuation procedures. Curiously, no explanation was given for the visible smoke in the published images. Perhaps the evacuation drills at the refinery are so realistic that the owners intentionally set certain parts of the building, filled with highly flammable materials, on fire to simulate a real emergency situation. Or, as the authorities in Tatarstan claim, the glow could come from an entirely different source. The orange glow in the sky is caused by the operation of flares, an essential component of the company's technological process, the press office stated. Maybe. But flares do not produce powerful orange glows escaping from every window of a building, as shown in the local images of the strike. It is much more likely that Ukraine succeeded in a drone strike on the Taneco plant, and that what we see in the images is indeed part of the refinery in flames. Such an attack could cost Russia millions of tons of refined petroleum products or crude oil awaiting processing. The Kyiv Independent provided further details on the attack. According to the media outlet, Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation, not only confirmed the strike but also explained the reasons behind the operation. This refinery plays a crucial role in supplying fuel to the Russian army, Kovalenko stated. The destruction of refineries and oil depots directly impacts Russia's ability to conduct high-intensity warfare. Newsweek also reports that the strike led to the evacuation of employees from the Taneco refinery. which could explain the alleged evacuation simulation, as well as the suspension of flights at 4 airports: Nizhnekamsk, Izhevsk, Kirov, and Ufa. This detail is significant. Russia would not suspend airport flights unless it suspected that drone attacks were ongoing or imminent. A simple evacuation exercise at the Taneco refinery would not justify delaying planes located kilometers away, which reinforces the credibility of Ukraine's claims regarding a successful strike. Combined with local images showing the refinery on fire, only one conclusion is possible. Ukraine struck the Taneco plant, and Russia is attempting to conceal the truth. Why is this strike so important? Kovalenko has already provided one of the answers. By destroying Taneco, Ukraine reduces Russia's capacity to supply its soldiers with refined petroleum products, mainly diesel and gasoline, essential for military operations on the front lines. It is highly likely that the majority of these products are destined for the Donetsk region in Ukraine, where Putin has dedicated much of 2024 to attempting to gain ground. Russia's efforts have indeed borne fruit, albeit on a much smaller scale than Putin had hoped. In 2024, it managed to conquer about 4,000 square kilometers of territory. But these gains came at an exorbitant cost: the loss of 430,000 soldiers. By destroying Taneco, Ukraine can reduce the pressure exerted by Putin's forces in the Donetsk region. With less fuel available, assaults that previously relied on tanks and armored vehicles will now have to be carried out on foot, making Russian soldiers much more vulnerable to Ukrainian defenses. This will allow Ukraine to significantly increase Russian losses. Consequently, Ukraine must face less formidable attacks while exacerbating Putin's manpower problems, all thanks to the strategic destruction of a key refinery. And the situation is only worsening for Putin. The drone strike on the Taneco refinery is just one attack among others in Ukraine's strategy to target the Russian oil industry. It is not even the first time Taneco has been targeted. The refinery has been hit before. On April 2, 2024, Reuters reported that a Ukrainian drone had succeeded in penetrating Taneco's defenses to carry out an attack. Although this strike had a lesser impact than the January 2025 one, the drone had damaged a unit capable of processing about 155,000 barrels of crude oil per day. Unfortunately for Ukraine, the damage caused by this strike was not critical, and Russia quickly put the unit back into service. However, this attack shows that Taneco has been a long-term target for Ukraine. If this unit had been completely destroyed, it would have reduced Taneco's capacity by 21,700 tons of crude oil per day, or 7.95 million of the 16 million tons the refinery processes annually. During the April attack, the drone managed to hit the CDU-7 unit, triggering a small fire. The Russian state news agency RIA claimed that the fire was controlled in just 20 minutes and that the unit was back in operation shortly after. However, this attack revealed significant strategic potential. The destruction of this single unit would have been enough to halve Taneco's refining capacity. A more substantial drone strike, like the one carried out in January, could not only target the CDU-7 unit again, but also destroy several other refining units, thereby dealing a much harsher blow to Russia. Ukraine has also conducted drone attacks against other oil facilities in Russia. About a month after its first attempt on the Taneco refinery, it turned its attention to an oil processing plant in the Bashkiria region. This strike was perhaps even more impressive than those on Taneco. A Ukrainian drone traveled about 1,500 kilometers, setting a distance record for a drone penetrating Russia, before striking the facility owned by Gazprom. Ukraine described this attack as the longest-range strike ever carried out against Russia at that time. Again, it targeted one of the country's largest refining and petrochemical plants. Images of the strike show the drone targeting a catalytic cracking unit, an essential component in refining, used to break down crude oil hydrocarbons into smaller molecules necessary for fuel production. Several videos show the unit emitting smoke. Although the attack did not destroy the facility's oil reserves, it disabled a key element for transforming that oil into usable fuel. The objective was clear: reduce the pressure on Ukrainian forces defending their territory by complicating the fuel supply for Russian front lines. There's even more to say. In April 2024, Ukraine did not limit itself to a strike on the Taneco plant. It also launched a drone attack on a Slavyansk refinery located in the Krasnodar region of Russia. This strike could very well be the most successful of all those mentioned so far. The fires triggered at the site forced the plant to suspend several of its operations. Eduard Trudnev, head of security at Slavyansk, had to publicly speak through the Russian news agency TASS to confirm the attack. "The operation of the Slavyansk plant has been partially suspended," he stated after the assault. Exactly 10 UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, flew directly at the plant. There was a strong fire. The fact that Russia had to admit that a fire broke out after this strike suggests that the attack was probably even more devastating than Eduard Trudnev implied. This impression seems to be confirmed by a Krasnodar government official, who indicated via telegram that, although the refinery's storage facilities were spared, the drone attack caused damage to a distillation tower. These towers play a crucial role in refining by separating crude oil into different fractions necessary for producing various petroleum products. Once again, Ukraine successfully targeted an essential link in the Russian oil refining chain, further hindering its ability to supply fuel to forces deployed on the front lines. At this point, a clear pattern emerges. Ukraine is launching targeted drone strikes on crucial parts of Russian oil refineries, essential for fuel production. These attacks, although downplayed by Russia, are generally successful and allow Ukraine to reduce the pressure on its besieged troops. It is evident that this drone strategy is working effectively. But in the face of this ingenious tactic, what is Russia doing to try to counter it? In May 2024, Radio Free Europe revealed some of the measures that Russia, under Putin's leadership, implemented after the strike on Gazprom's refinery in the Bashkiria region. The Russian Ministry of Energy announced that it was planning, and had likely already installed, missile systems in several refineries deemed vulnerable to attacks. At the same time, the companies, often state-controlled, operating these refineries adopted more rudimentary solutions. They covered potential targets with metal nets to try to protect them against drones. This improvised initiative is explained by the fact that Russia cannot afford to deploy air defense systems en masse, as its own military stocks are already under pressure. Reports also indicate that refinery owners have begun training their own mobile air defense groups. However, these teams are little more than people armed with machine guns, tasked with attempting to shoot down drones before they reach their targets. Such an approach offers limited protection against fast and precise drones capable of maneuvering and easily evading reactive machine gun fire. As demonstrated by the January 2025 attack on the Taneco refinery, whatever measures are deployed to protect these critical infrastructures are clearly insufficient. Ukraine's long-range drones continue to bypass Russian defenses and inflict significant damage. We must therefore address two essential questions in this video. Why is Ukraine investing so many resources in these drone strikes against Russian refineries? And are there any drawbacks to the country concentrating so much effort on the Russian oil industry? We have already touched on some of the reasons behind this strategy. Each strike against a Russian oil refinery potentially decreases its capacity, thereby weakening Russian troops on the front lines and easing the pressure on Ukrainian forces. But there's more. As the Carnegie Endowment points out, oil is a fundamental pillar of the Russian economy and remains essential for maintaining Putin's war machine. Each attack on a refinery is not just about hitting the Russian economy's collective wallet, it also offers Ukraine a symbolic victory. These strikes demonstrate that Ukraine is capable of targeting and destroying some of Russia's most valuable resources, even hundreds of kilometers behind the front lines. As for why Ukraine targets refineries rather than Russia's vast oil fields, the Carnegie Endowment explains that it comes down to practicality. Russian oil fields, often gigantic, are primarily located in the remote regions of Siberia. They have few infrastructures to target, and their vastness makes it difficult to identify a strategic point to strike. In contrast, Russian oil refineries, which cost tens of billions of dollars to build, are essential for transforming crude oil into usable products. By attacking these refineries, Ukraine targets facilities densely equipped with crucial equipment and forces Russia to consider reconstruction at a time when it cannot afford to spend more. These refinery attacks also allow Ukraine to directly impact ordinary Russians. Indeed, refined petroleum products are not only used by soldiers on the front lines. Russian citizens depend on these fuels to run their vehicles and heat their homes. Moreover, refineries also produce fuel for airplanes, giving Ukraine the opportunity to ground part of the Russian air fleet with each strike. Beyond these inconveniences, disrupting the flow of refined petroleum products also leads to price increases. hitting the economy and the daily lives of Russians even harder. During the week of November 26th to December 2nd, 2024, fuel and refined petroleum product prices in Russia increased by 0.4%. This type of increase has regularly repeated itself throughout Putin's special military operation in Ukraine, with each strike on a refinery reducing the availability of these essential resources. When adding these increases to a Russia already hit by a cost of living crisis, it becomes evident that these attacks on refineries not only relieve pressure on Ukrainian forces, but also exacerbate the economic difficulties of Russian citizens. These strikes also create internal pressure for Putin on a national level. Russia is already facing a base interest rate of 21%, making borrowing more difficult for the population, and inflation reached 9.5% by the end of 2024. Combining these factors with supply reductions caused by attacks on refineries means that not only is Russia's war machine under increased financial pressure, but so are ordinary citizens. Ukraine is likely hoping that these difficulties will push the Russian population to pressure Putin to end his war before their standard of living deteriorates further. Kyiv can even claim that these strikes achieve the objectives that the West pursued by imposing sanctions on Russia. Although these sanctions are effective in the long term, their impact has been limited because Russia has found other ways to sell its oil. Till recently, Russian oil trade in Europe remained strong, and non-Western customers like China and India continued to buy in large quantities. While additional sanctions could restrict these trades, Ukraine claims that its strikes on refineries reduced Russia's refining capacity by 900,000 barrels per day in May 2024, causing even more damage since then. In other words, they perfectly reinforce the sanctions already in place. Russia also does not have unlimited storage capacity for its crude oil. Although there is no specific expiration date, inadequate storage leads to oil degradation, making it unsuitable for refining into the petroleum products Russia needs. With storage facilities already close to their limits, each strike on a refinery reduces the utility of stored crude oil. Russia must then choose between keeping it, risking its degradation, or selling it, preventing it from being transformed into gasoline and diesel. Although Russia can overcome this obstacle by moving more crude oil from its stocks to compensate for refinery losses, this incurs additional costs and delays. These complications directly serve Ukraine's objectives, weakening Russian soldiers on the front lines and increasing the cost of living for the Russian population. All these advantages explain why Ukraine wants to continue its strikes on refineries. However, it faces certain challenges. At the time of creating this video, the elected President Donald Trump has been in office for days, pushing Ukraine to accelerate its strikes. Trump has expressed his intention to negotiate peace between Russia and Ukraine, although his schedule has been postponed from his inauguration to several months after the start of his term. Ukraine will likely seek to inflict maximum damage on Russia's oil refining capacity before these talks, further weakening the Russian economy to gain strategic leverage during negotiations. However, Trump could also pressure Ukraine to halt these strikes, especially since he has already expressed significant concern over the escalation caused by President Joe Biden's decision to allow Ukraine to attack Russian targets with US-made missiles. Certainly, Ukraine's strikes on refineries seem to be primarily carried out with its own drones, which reduces its incentive to comply with a potential request from Trump to stop. However, disapproval from a major Western power and the main contributor to Ukraine's military aid could push Kyiv to slow its attacks on refineries to appease Trump. Ukraine also faces a constant risk: retaliation from Russia against its own oil infrastructures. Moscow has already carried out several strikes, including against the Kremenchuk refinery in September 2023 and again in February 2024. According to the Carnegie Endowment, this is the only major refinery still operational in Ukraine since the beginning of the war, indicating that the Kremlin is clearly seeking revenge for Ukrainian strikes on Russian refineries. It is also crucial to highlight that Russia has repeatedly targeted Ukraine's electrical infrastructure, aiming to inflict the same type of suffering on Ukrainian citizens that strikes on refineries inflict on Russia. These attacks are therefore not one-sided. The Russian counterattack remains a constant threat, with the Kremlin notably targeting production units at the Dnipro GES hydroelectric power plant to remind Ukraine that it can also strike Kyiv on the energy front. Will these two factors be enough to deter Ukraine from sending drones against Russian oil refineries? The January 2025 strike suggests not. On the contrary, it is likely that we will witness several other similar attacks in the weeks following Donald Trump's inauguration, with Ukraine seeking to cause as much damage as it can while it still can. But what do you think about Ukraine's strike on the Taneco refinery and its overall strategy targeting Russian oil? Has this approach proven as effective as Ukraine hoped? Will Donald Trump's rise to power lead to pressures on Ukraine to end these attacks? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you for watching this video.